Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. It's the day after the election. Oh, I'm just letting whatever reaction you're having happen, but we have a lot to talk about. This was actually very good news for those of us who are in favor of, I don't know, limited government, more freedom, better accountability in government, and keeping more of what we earn. I've got details coming up about why Idahoans are on a roll for freedom.
Press club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. It's wonderful to sit down twice a week and talk about some of the issues that affect us as Idahoans. And this election that we had yesterday was one of those things that needs to be discussed. By the way, I want to give a quick shout out here to the many people who work behind the scenes. Look, I have always taken it for granted when I walk into a polling place, I show my ID, I prove my residency, and I go and vote. And the people are very pleasant, they're very helpful. I had no idea until yesterday how much work it takes behind the scenes for not only the poll workers, but also the election officials, starting with your county clerk, right on down the line, to make those elections count. It's a Herculean effort, and it's very impressive. I was very happy to be a part of it. A long day, 13 hours at best. I think I got off pretty easy. There were some who were up into the wee hours of the night. Nonetheless, this was an election that I think for people who tend to favor freedom and not so much the woke blob, I think it was a pretty satisfactory outcome. Of course, it goes without saying Donald Trump has been elected to a second term in the White House, and decisively so. Not only winning the electoral votes, but also winning the popular vote. And is it really a surprise? I won't go into a lot of detail here, but this was possibly the greatest example of mainstream media manipulation or attempted manipulation of the public's viewpoints and opinions through just outright lying and fabrication. And I'm not trying to rub salt in Kamala Harris's wounds. Look, she has to deal with what she has to deal with, but what a losing strategy on the part of the Democrats to put a terribly unqualified candidate out there, someone who was unpopular enough that not a single vote, Democratic vote, meaning the voters themselves, actually cast a vote for her. She was appointed. The voters rejected the fact that every time she showed up, it had to be in the company of a rapper or a singer or somebody. And when the performance was done, what did people do? They booed Kamala. Now, on the other hand, this is not to suggest that Donald Trump walks on water and we should be ending our prayers in his names, but he got out there and connected with the people. And most importantly, I think he portrayed a message more about America and more about her people than about who we're against. So it was, and mainstream media has yet to get that memo. They're still doubling down on how did all these stupid non-college educated people run towards racism and misogyny and so forth. They can't quite see the role that they've played. And I guess until they're crashed on the rocks of reality, they really won't understand it. Now, let's talk a little bit about what this election meant, though, for us here in Idaho, because this was actually a pretty positive thing. Let me show you here with this headline. Idaho voters reject Prop 1, the open primaries and ranked choice voting ballot initiative. By the way, there's a falsehood in that headline. This is another reason why mainstream media is struggling to maintain relevancy as well as credibility. They squander it trying to mislead the public. There was nothing about open primaries in that initiative. It was about a jungle primary. And it was the ranked choice voting that more than anything, I think, put this over the top, and by a clear 2-to-1 plus margin. Idaho voters opposed Proposition 1, and this is according to, as they tell us, the unofficial general election results. Now, this is just kind of a face-saving thing about they won't be official until they've all been thoroughly canvassed and pronounced official, by the Secretary of State. But it lost, and it lost big time. From the Idaho Capitol Sun, in one of the most closely watched elections in Idaho, the Proposition 1 ballot initiative that sought to end what it called closed party primary elections and bring ranked choice voting to general elections was defeated, according to unofficial election results released Tuesday night by the Idaho Secretary of State's office. The Associated Press called the race at 12:45 a.m. Wednesday, according to results released at 2:15 a.m. by the Idaho Secretary of State's office. 69.6% of Idaho voters voted against Proposition 1, while 30.4% of voters voted for it, with 33 of Idaho's 44 counties fully reporting. Now, incomplete election results show 537,553 voters against Prop 1, with 234,407 voters in favor of it. Now, look, we can try to spin that. Well, it might come back. There might be other votes that they haven't counted, but it was repudiated, and by a fairly large margin. Now, let's ask ourselves why. Is it because we're just too stupid to know what's good for us? That's really kind of on the national level. That seems to be the approach that's being taken. But it's probably something a little more simple in that when it was explained how deception was used to try to sell this concept to the voters, most Idahoans, at least those who voted, saw through it. By the way, having worked as a poll worker and just seeing a small glimpse of what it takes to have that accountability and to go through making sure that every ballot is accounted for, I cannot imagine the additional complexity that it would add to have to go through and look, okay, well, we have to rank this one and then throw this ballot out and add this person's choice over here. It's complication that is not needed to have fair and free elections. And yet that was what overwhelmingly the ads purporting, to promote Prop 1. Well, we want to restore free and fair elections to Idaho. No, it was a way to muddy the water to allow left-wing activists, who again got thumped hard yesterday nationally as well as in Idaho, to implement whatever it is they see as the way that we ought to be doing things. Look, if they have merits, let them succeed on their merits. But if they can't do that, then I guess they want to break the system in order to, get their way. So there was another thought on this too, and this was as far as the Idaho Fair Elections group said, they released a press release here saying, on Election Day 2024, Gem State voters demonstrated why Idaho is a bastion of freedom and sanity. I like the fact that they also pointed out, despite Idahoans for Open Primaries spending more than $5.5 million to deliberately mislead Idaho voters regarding the true purpose of Prop 1, Idaho voters still rejected Prop 1, 65 to 35% as of 10 p.m. It actually went up. It's now 69.6%. Look at the money that was being spent. And again, most of that money, the vast majority of it, 80+%, coming from out-of-state sources. Doesn't that make you just a little bit curious? Why is that? So let's go on here. Again, this is from the Gem State Chronicle, the republishing this press release here from Idaho Fair Elections. The unprecedented effort to pass Prop 1 included more than $4.5 million from out-of-state political organizations. Those organizations include Article 4 out of Arlington, Virginia, Unite America PAC from Denver, Colorado, Wayback PAC from Sheridan, Wyoming, and many other non-Idaho political activists. These political organizations spent millions of dollars to learn what any Idaho voter would have told them for free. Idaho elections are not for sale. No amount of expensive, polished advertising could deceive Idahoans into thinking that Prop 1 is good for our state. Idaho Fair Elections PAC and other Idaho-based political organizations were outspent by a wide margin. However, our collective grassroots efforts prevailed for one simple reason: we told Idaho voters the truth about Prop 1 and its backers. Okay, that's some good, straight-up truth as to why this initiative rightly failed. Now, on Wednesday, in light of Idaho's election results, Idaho Freedom Foundation and Idaho Freedom Action President Ronald M. Nate released the following statement, saying the people of Idaho have spoken. Proposition 1, the attempt by out-of-state leftists to rig our elections, has failed. This initiative was initially placed on our ballot by organizations who deceived Idahoans into believing they were signing a petition to revert back to the old open primary system, the very same one the legislature chose to do away with over a decade ago. Instead, Proposition 1 was really an initiative to implement jungle primaries and ranked choice voting. Ron goes on to say this would have been costly, confusing, and it would have weakened the voices of Idahoans everywhere. This movement, backed by so-called Idahoans for Open Primaries, was funded by over 80% by out-of-state interests who sought to undermine our state's sovereignty. But luckily, a majority of Idahoans saw through all these lies and voted to strike down this initiative. He says this should be a lesson to all other leftist interest groups seeking to force their beliefs on us. You're wasting your time and money, and the good people of Idaho see through your deceit. By the way, Ron had this to add, concluding a call to action for Idaho's legislature and saying, It's high time to reform or eliminate this phony initiative process, which has been manipulated and abused by special interests. Our state works better as a true representative republic. But it's the people's voice. But if the people can be easily manipulated, especially by large ad buys by out-of-state special interest groups, is it really the people's voice or just what they're being told is their voice? Yeah, I have to agree with Ron. You know, a representative republic, there's a reason that the founders insisted that every state have a Republican form of government. All right, one other story here I need to touch on very briefly, and that is it was actually a good night for the GOP in the state of Idaho. Idaho Republicans to expand supermajority in Idaho legislature, looking to gain 4 seats in the Idaho legislature at the expense of Idaho Dems. Clark Corbin, reporting for the Idaho Capital Sun, says, although it's too early to tell, losing seats in the 2024 general election could potentially cost Democrats some of the few seats they do hold on influential legislative campaigns or committees, rather, such as the House State Education Committee and the House Health and Welfare Committee. Idaho legislators will convene an organizational session in early December to elect leadership positions, choose committee chairs, and make committee assignments. And this is kind of the copium here. The election results in Idaho will not become official in Idaho until they're certified by the Idaho State Board of Canvassers November 26th in Boise. So it's not official yet, but it's a good move. If Wednesday's results hold, he tells us the balance of power would shift to a 91-14 advantage for the Idaho GOP. Breaking it down further, Republicans would control 30 seats in the Idaho Senate compared to 5 seats for the Democrats. Republicans would also see their influence in the Idaho House grow to a 61-9 advantage over Democrats. Now, this is only an advantage if those Republicans actually govern like Republicans and not like Republicans in name only. So, the work is far from over. And by the way, if you want to become more involved, if you want to become a citizen lobbyist and be involved in your own governance, we will have more information forthcoming about Legislature 101. This is a service that is offered by the Idaho Freedom Foundation to teach you how to better understand the process by which bills are advanced and laws are made, and the way your legislature operates, so you can more effectively track legislation as well as communicate with your legislators and effectively help them understand what your priorities are and how to better make your influence felt as a citizen. It's coming up in early January before the legislature meets. We'll have details coming up right here. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark